The Roman Empire. Classes. Conflict. Society was divided in two classes, the upper-class patricians and the working-class plebeians, whose social standing and rights under the law were initially rigidly defined in favor of the upper class until the period characterized by the conflict of the orders, circa 500 to 287 BCE, a power struggle between the plebeians and the patricians. The conflict of the orders began when Roman patricians were campaigning against neighboring tribes for supremacy in the region and needed men for their armies. In 494 BCE, the plebeians, who made up the bulk of the fighting force, refused to serve in the military until they were given a voice in government. Their grievances were addressed by new laws which allowed them to send their own representative, a tribune, to the Senate and, in 449 BCE, by the 12 Tables, the laws of Rome defined by 5 social classes: patricians, equites, plebeians, freedmen, slaves. Although patricians have traditionally been presented as landed gentry and the plebeians as the landless poor, this is a misconception. The patricians definitely did make up the Senate and were the ruling class, but there were many powerful plebeian families and, as Roman history progressed, many patrician families lost their wealth and standing while plebeian families' fortunes improved, which were publicly posted for all to see and guaranteed that no one was above the law. Prior to the conflict, plebeians were strictly second-class citizens who were forbidden to marry patricians while, after 445 BCE, this law was changed and plebeians could marry whomever they chose and had a voice in politics. By the time the conflict of the orders ended, Roman society was dramatically. Basically, the patricians were the aristocracy. One had to be born a patrician, while the plebeians were everyone else. But plebeian did not necessarily equate to poor. Farmers, plumbers, artisans, teachers, contractors, architects, and many other respectable and lucrative professions were all represented by the plebeian class. The equites, equestrian class, cavalry, were originally the royal mounted knights who were given a certain amount of money to purchase and care for their horse in the period of the early republic and so became associated with commerce and trade. They eventually formed part of the upper class dealing with business. In 218 BCE, a law was passed prohibiting senators from engaging in commerce because it could compromise their legislative decisions. The equites were patrician class males, socially inferior to the senatorial class, who ran the banks, collected taxes, operated import-export of goods, and managed trade houses as well as the slave trade. Freedmen were slaves who had managed to buy their freedom or whose owners had set them free. The freedman, or woman, then became a client of their former owner, relying on his or her patronage. Freed slaves were granted citizenship but could not hold political office. Any children of freed slaves, however, were given full rights as citizens. Freedmen could work any job they were qualified for but often continued in whatever duties they had performed for their former master when a slave. Slaves were the lowest class in society without any rights and considered property of the master. The quality of life as a Roman slave varied according to one's master and one's job. Life in the mines or in building roads was considerably more difficult than skilled artisan slaves who worked for craftsmen or served their masters as tutors or musicians. Even so, no matter how easy a slave's responsibilities might seem, they were still subject to the whims of their master who could have them beaten, or even killed, for any reason. Romans relied heavily on slaves to do whatever jobs they did not want to. Female slaves served their mistresses in every aspect of their lives, from helping them bathe, dress, and put on makeup to tending the children, cleaning the home, and assisting in shopping. Male slaves served the master of the house in many capacities, including personal assistants, children's tutor, waiter, butler, bodyguard, overseer on estates among many others. At one point, the Romans considered instituting a law requiring slaves to wear a certain uniform to identify themselves but decided against this as they feared it would alert the slaves to how numerous they were and possibly encourage a revolt. Slave revolts were a perennial fear of the Romans, which was realized in the Spartacus slave revolt of 73 to 71 BCE, which terrorized the Romans and haunted them for years after. Most slaves were foreigners captured in war or taken by slavers, but some Romans sold themselves or their children into slavery as a means of paying off a debt. Patrician families sometimes held as many as 1,000 slaves on a small estate and more elsewhere, and these slaves served the interests of the state through service to the nucleus of the state, the family.